Howdy folks, welcome back to Doing Brew. In today's video we're going to be installing a large format tile with a really nice dark grout to accent the tile. And hey, I'd like to ask you to stick with us through the entire video so you can see pictures of two viewer projects that turned out really nice, as well as thanking our latest Patreon patron. Please stick with us to the end of the video. As you can see, the first thing we got to do is clean up following our cement board install. That was on video 7. So today we're going to be putting down what I think is this beautiful porcelain tile, rectangular format. It's 12 inches by 24. Plus, with the light and gray tones that streak through this large format tile, those alabaster white cabinets are really going to pop off of this floor. It's going to be really, really pretty. Now, some things to note about working with a large format, specifically a rectangular tile. If you want to offset, you need to do that in a certain way. It's recommended that you never offset your tile with a rectangular tile at the 50%, the halfway point. In fact, it's recommended that you do some combination of roughly about a third, or in this case 8 inches, and then of course you can use the remaining 16 inches of tile for the next course, which really minimizes your waste. Now, as you can see, we're really fortunate in that our entry tile from the dining room into the kitchen are almost 3 full tiles. Now, I've chosen to use a 3/16 inch spacer. They recommend no less than 1/8 of an inch. So 3/16 is just a bit more of a grout line than 1/8, but I think that's going to be really nice. And since I'll be able to use just about 3 full tiles here, it's going to make our initial course relatively easy to put down and measure and ensure it's square with the back wall. And that's kind of important to know ahead of time. Now, already I know I'm out of square by about 3/16 of an inch. So I'm going to have to make that up right where the tile meets the existing oak flooring. It's time to make some cuts, and we're just going to go ahead and cut a number of these, cut 8 inches off. That'll yield a whole slew of 8 and 16 inch pieces for us to lay down this tile. So let's go ahead and get to work here on tile day. Big day for this project. And as I mentioned, the first thing we got to do is make a handful of 8 inch cuts. That's going to yield multiple 8 inch pieces and multiple 16 inch pieces. And as you can see here, we've doubled up the tile, stacked one on top of the other to speed up this initial cut process. We've got Alex, our expert tile cutter, on the job. He actually does have a talent for cutting tile. He's very patient and very exacting in all the work that he does. Now you notice that little ear I had to cut out of this tile. That's to accommodate the opening. I had to cut off about 3/4 of an inch back on the tile saw with Alex, and he's going to nibble that away very simply with the tile saw. Just going to kind of get that saw in there just a bit, being careful not to overcut too much, although we will have a nice baseboard that will cover this cut and overcut. But we want to be as careful as we can. And that looks pretty good. Even though it's not up to Alex's exacting standards, it is well within the tolerances for our baseboard. Before we put down the tile, need to spread out our thinset, and I'm using a 1/4 inch notch trowel for this. As I've mentioned before, the notch trowel is a pretty amazing little tool. It spreads the thinset as well as measures out the exact right amount of thinset you need for the size and type of tile that you're installing. Now you'll notice that I'm going in very nice straight rows, and that's not just because I'm very particular about making my thinset look nice and neat. That's actually the proper way to do it, because by going in a nice straight row, you measure out exactly the right amount of thinset for your tile application. Placing that cut tile in place and getting ready to set the second tile. Now, right here is the cut edge. That's the edge that we want to put up against the oak flooring, which will be hidden by the transition piece once the kitchen is complete. Now you see that little white dot there? That's actually a bullseye level. It's a really nice little tool to have with large format tile. It ensures that you get it perfectly level in all directions. Highly recommend using that. And they only cost a couple bucks. I'll put a link in the description so you can purchase one for yourself. And just working to get my spacer in here. Again, that's a 3/16 inch spacer. One on each end will be sufficient. Next, I'm going to take out my 2-foot level. And I'm going to use this not necessarily to check to see if the tiles are level. I've already done that with the bullseye level. What I'm looking for here is a bump right there where these two tiles come together. You can check this by hand, but you might miss it. But you'll definitely feel it underfoot. Always best is to use a small level back and forth to see if it catches on the edge of one of those tiles. Next up, I'll be installing almost a full tile. I need to account for the thickness of the stud wall because remember, my tiles begin there at the transition for the oak, and I need this tile to line up with all the other 24-inch tiles. So I'm making a mark at 4 5/8 inches. I'm going to spread out some additional thinset while Alex makes that cut. That tile fits in perfectly. I'll put in my new spacers and then check it with the bullseye level. Make a couple of small adjustments, get that bubble right in the center of that level. That looks pretty good. Now shifting to the left side of the kitchen entry, and this tile is what should be an 8-inch tile, but again cut to accommodate the thickness of the stud wall. And I'm doing that to ensure that all of the horizontal grout lines line up nicely. Here I put in one additional full tile, adding my spacers around. I still have a few cut tiles to install along the wall, but I'm going to go ahead and shift my focus over to some full tile installs and space them with our spacers. We'll be back to making some cuts here in just a few minutes. Here I'm just applying a little bit of pressure to the bottom of the tile to close that upper grout line to ensure I've got a uniform 3/16 inch grout line. And just so you're keeping pace with me on what size tile I'm installing, this is what would be a full 24-inch tile, but again, cut 4 5/8 inches off of the end to maintain our pattern. So it's important to note the way the thinset goes on and the trowel that you use. Now the trowel that you use is specific to either the tile you're putting down or the thinset you're using. For a large format tile like this, the recommended trowel is a quarter all the way around, so a quarter by a quarter by a quarter. And that's all about the teeth and the width of the teeth, the spacing of the teeth, and the height of the teeth. And it's pretty interesting the way it works, and it took me a while to figure this out, but this is actually measuring out the exact right amount of thinset to properly adhere your tile to the floor. So as you pull down, it's measuring out the amount of thinset you need so you have just the right amount. You'll see a lot of guys that are, pros that will go whoosh, 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 and it looks pretty cool, no doubt. But when you swipe over one way and then turn and come back the other way, you're leaving a tall ridge somewhere in the middle. And so the proper way to put down thinset for any kind of tile or stone that you're applying is to pull it in a straight direction. It doesn't matter if you're going this way or that way, but just go the same way all the time, and you're measuring out exactly the right amount of thinset or adhesive to properly adhere your tile to the floor. So that measurement works out to 4 1/8 inches. We want to cut this tile to accommodate our 3/16 inch grout line. And then I also want approximately 3/16 of an inch running along the wall to allow for expansion and contraction. So 3/16 times 2, 6/16. So 4 1/4 inches minus 6/16 is 3 3/4 inches. So we want to cut our tile along this wall to approximately 3 3/4 inches. Okay, and here's our tile, cut to approximately 3 3/4 inches. Now, we have our cut edge here and our cut edge along the top. We cut the tile intentionally that way so we'd have a finished edge out on both sides that face out into the room. Let's go ahead and pop this guy in place. Now, for our purposes, that really doesn't matter that much because there's going to be an entire row of cabinets, base cabinets, along this wall. But just wanted to point it out, and we always try and do the best tile job possible, so you do want to keep your factory edges facing out to the fullest extent possible. Now we're getting ready for the final big push. All full tiles going in, and Alex is loading us up with all the tiles we're going to need, and we're going to break into a time lapse here in just a moment so that you can see the whole floor come together without having to endure the 3 or 4 hours that it takes for us to put it in. But as you can see, once you get to this point, the field tiles, meaning the tiles in the middle of the floor, do go in really fast, and it's pretty satisfying to see it come together so quickly. Now, I had to let things set up overnight. As you can see, I'm standing on tiles that it appeared as though I just put in place. Of course, you have to let those set overnight before light traffic. And I'm just setting in the last set of tiles that runs along the final wall here. We'll get these set in place. Of course, they'll have to set up overnight, and then we'll come back and begin our grouting. And if there's an awful, thankless job in home improvement, kitchen remodeling, it's grouting tile. But it's a necessary step. You got to get it done. We'll get to it here in just a moment. So some pretty simple cuts here to go around the door opening that goes out into the utility room, and then a couple of final full tiles in place, and then I'll put a couple of cut tiles along the wall, and we'll be done. And of course, we'll let this set up overnight prior to beginning our grouting. And after a full 24 hours of cure time for our thinset, it's time to grout. First thing you got to do is get up all the spacers, and you've got to do a very thorough cleaning. In our case, we're going to be putting down a black grout, which is really going to look nice on these gray tiles, but that light gray or even a white thinset will really show up in a dark grout. Those little tiny chunks and splinters of thinset will stick out like a sore thumb in a dark grout. So you have to really take your time, go the extra effort to clean up all the thinset and dust on the floor before you grout. We're going to be using polyblend grout. This is very common in the larger home improvement stores. First thing you want to do though, pour a little bit of water in the bucket, and then you want to clean off your mixing paddle. Always a chance that some dust or some sort of contaminant will be on that paddle. You want to make sure it's clean before you begin mixing your grout. Per the instructions, you want to add water first and then pour in your grout mix. And you're going to mix this to a consistency of about cake icing, if you will. Not too stiff, but just stiff enough that it'll stand up on a putty knife. You want to make sure that it is moist so that it's easily spread fully and completely into your grout lines. It looks like I need a little bit more grout mix. We're going to mix this thoroughly. I highly recommend using a power mixer as opposed to trying to mix it by hand. It's much easier, much more thorough this way. Then you want to put a liberal amount of grout on the floor, and then using your grout float, which is a special rubber float that won't scratch your tiles, you want to massage that grout into the grout lines. Really, there's no awesome technique that I can tell you here other than persistence. Go over and over and over your grout lines until you're absolutely sure that you've got a complete filling of grout prior to removing the excess grout. And you can see what you want to do there. Put the grout float at 45 degrees. That's a 45-degree angle to the floor, and drag it along your grout lines to scrape up the residue off the tiles as much as you can. There's going to be residue remaining. There's no way around that, but you do want to try and get as much off as you can for two reasons. You can reuse the grout that you scrape off, plus that's going to save you some time in cleanup at the end of the grouting process. And in my opinion, that's the most tedious part of any tile job. That's the final cleanup. It just seems like you go over and over and over the floor with a damp sponge, and you're continually bringing up more grout residue. So just as before with the tile install, we're going to break into a time lapse here, mostly just to save you all the time of the hour and a half it takes to do a floor this size. But the process is the same, and you can see we kind of work a pattern there together, ensuring all the grout lines are thoroughly filled. Now this is a little technique of mine. With about half of the floor completed, I like to go over it with a damp sponge for an initial cleaning, just trying to get off the majority of the grout residue. Being real careful not to impact the grout lines very much, just a gentle swipe of the sponge over the grout lines. But in the middle of the tile, you do want to try and get off any of the residual grout, especially some that might be caked up on the tile. While you do want to be careful on the grout lines themselves, this is an opportunity with the damp sponge to do kind of a final shaping of your grout line to make sure you have a consistent line all the way through your tile job. Well, at this point, we've got half of our grout installed and half of that floor at least cleaned up on the initial cleanup. Now we have to go back, restart our grouting process, and finish this floor out. And here at the final push, kind of a division of labor, I'm going to finish out with the grout install while Alex begins the initial step of cleanup on the fresh grout we just put down. You want to let that grout set up for about 30 minutes before you go over it with a sponge. And now begins the long process of what seems like continual grout cleanup. As you can see, there's quite a bit of grout residue left on these tiles, and this is after the second complete cleaning or wipe down with damp sponges. As I mentioned before, it's going to take you a good 8 to 10 times of going over this floor with clean water and clean sponges. And you're going to want to keep cleaning, keep removing this grout residue until you're able to do it to the point where your water in your buckets is just about clear. Of course, if it's not clear, it means you're still picking up residue off the floor. And that'll end up getting on your shoes and track through the house. So it's really important to get that cleaned up. And the viewer projects are coming up next, but real quick, here is a look at our finished tile floor. And it really did come out nicely. The dark tile in combination with the dark grout is really going to look nice against the white cabinets and the gray countertops we're going to install. Those install videos are right around the corner, so make sure you subscribe to Doing Brew so you don't miss any episodes. Hey, as many of you may know, we launched our Patreon site just a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to report we have a brand new patron supporting Doing Brew, Remy82. Thanks a lot for the support, Remy82. It does mean a lot. And hey, Patreon supporters get early access to all Do and Brew videos. First up in the viewer projects is Jason's ledger stone project. He did a fantastic job installing ledger stone on the backsplash behind his range. Look how tight that corner is. Jason got inspiration to knock out this great ledger stone backsplash job from the 2 ledger stone videos on Do and Brew. And I'll leave a link to one of those videos at the end of this video. Next up is Art in Virginia, who used the mini mudroom video series for inspiration to build out his own mini mudroom. Believe it or not, Art says that this is the first carpentry-based home improvement project that he's taken on. Wow, what a great job. I can't imagine what you're going to build in the future, Art. Good work on this project. And I'm glad that Do and Brew played some small role in helping you complete it. Well, that's all for the viewer projects for this video. Thanks a lot for sending them in, guys. And hey, for all my other subscribers out there, if you complete a project, please send in your pictures. I'd love to showcase them here on the channel. Next in this series, we'll be placing the upper cabinets in place. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned so you don't miss it. See you next time, folks. Take care.